Have to take me for a meal before they find that sort of thing out. Come on, come round. We're now standing on Tower Green, the village green in the Tower of London. But unlike most village greens in this country where you'll find a cricket pitch or perhaps a mill pond, we've got our own private execution site. And that horrific sight, not you son, but that small glass memorial, and it's not to be confused with a public scaffold outside on the hill. 3 Queens of England and 3 others died here. Before I tell you about them, I'd like to describe a few of the buildings that surround the green. Look straight down the path, you can see a set of steps, and opposite those steps is the entrance of the Bloody Tower. And in there are a number of exhibitions, one to do with Walter Raleigh, one to do with the 2 boy princes, and one about a man called Thomas Overbury, who was a poisoned victim. It was the JFK conspiracy of its day. Moving along, you can see the black and white Tudor building called the Queen's House. This dates from about 1540 and is the best preserved Tudor building in the City of London, thanks mainly to the Great Fire of London burning all its opposition. It is now the home of the Constable of the Tower of London, and being the home of such an important person, it has sometimes been used to accommodate some very important prisoners. Prior to her execution in 1542, Queen Catherine Howard spent time in there. A man called William Penn spent 8 months on the top floor for his offensive writing. He was only released on the condition that he left this country, which he did, crossed the Atlantic and founded the Quaker colonies in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. Anyone from that neck of the woods? Okay. Another man to spend a bit of time in there was a man called Rudolf Hess. He was the deputy leader of the Nazi Party in Germany during World War II. He was the man that Adolf Hitler actually dictated Mein Kampf to while they were in prison together. Now, he was arrested up by Glasgow and brought here for 3 days in May 1941 before being moved into the country for his own protection. At the end of the war, he was taken over to Nuremberg and sentenced to life imprisonment in Spandau Prison, Berlin. Many of my colleagues have actually guarded him and spoken to him. Moving along, we can see the Beauchamp Tower, and inside there are 91 inscriptions carved into the walls by the prisoners. Some of those carvings are over 500 years old, and I think you should go and see them because they really are quite intricate, and it's real living history. Moving along, that's the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula. We'll be going in there at the end of our tour. And finally, that large building with the golden clock is where you'll find the crown jewels and royal regalia. So you just walk straight to the end, turn left and back in on yourself, and that is the entrance. Now when you go in there, ladies, you're going to be looking at over 20,780 rare diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, pearls, topaz, jade and more gold than you can wave a sticker. You're going to be looking at one of the most fabulous diamonds in the world, 530.2 carats of pure diamond. There's only one diamond in the world bigger than that. The King of Thailand has that, and his is yellow. Not very nice. Ours is beautiful. When you go in there, you'll see that. Ladies, your legs are going to go weak when you look at the diamond. Your lips will start to tremble. Perhaps a tear will form in one eye. Meanwhile, the man that brought you here, he's going to be stood by your side in silence because he loves you. Can I give you some advice, ladies? Don't be tempted to bring your engagement ring up and start comparing the two. All that's going to do is confirm that nagging doubt that's been burning away in the back of your head all this time, that in fact you've probably married a loser. Like my wife. Now, let's return our attention to the scaffold site here behind us where these people died. Now, the first victim in 1536 was Queen Anne Boleyn. Now, she was brought here on trumped-up charges. Trumped up to say because, well, she was 35 years old, she hadn't provided the king with a son and heir, she'd had a number of miscarriages, and it was unlikely that she would be able to produce one. So, the king turned his attention to Jane Seymour and tasked Thomas Cromwell with getting rid of his second wife. Thomas Cromwell came up with 27 charges and she was convicted on 2 of them. There was a hall over there, and that hall has long since been demolished, and that's where she was tried. She was brought here the day of her execution. She was absolutely petrified at the prospect of dying an agonising death at the hands of a clumsy axeman. So she requested that she be executed in the French style, with a 2-handed sword. Now this was granted by the king, and a French master swordsman was sent for from Calais. Imagine the scene on the day of the execution. Straw lay all around the scaffold, mainly to absorb the blood, but also to hide the straw, which was wrapped in a sackcloth beneath that straw. Now, sword, I said. Now, the Queen was on her knees with her head bowed in prayer, and occasionally she'd flick a sideways glance just to see what the executioner was doing. And when the executioner knew the time was right, he'd go down on his knees, pull out that sword and held it aloft in readiness, just above Queen Anne. And then, inexplicably, he said, "Bring me my sword!" And this startled Anne in such a way that she looked up, and at that point, the executioner smote her head from her body with one quick, clean strike. fact, it was so precise, the Queen herself did not know it had occurred. Because when the executioner bent down to pick up that severed head to show the 1,000 who were assembled, they as one gasped. They as one gasped. Not quite as one, was it? Because it was seen that the eyes were still moving in the sockets, fixing and focusing on people in the crowd. And then they gasped again. Because it was seen that her lips were still moving in silent prayer. For up to 25 seconds it was recorded. The head was placed next to the torso, and then the executioner, his assistants, and all the 1,000 assembled walked off, excitedly chattering they'd just executed Anne Boleyn. In their excitement, the administration had completely forgotten to bring a casket to that execution. And so the ladies in waiting sat around that body for 3 hours as it seeped blood, wondering what to do. And then the yeoman warder walked past. He knew what to do. He went over there and he brought back a large elm box, a box we used to export longbow arrows in. They placed the box next to the body and the head were placed inside that box, taken into the chapel, and then together they buried her beneath the altar. Now that's where she remained up until 1876, when Queen Victoria decreed that she should be placed in a more appropriate casket. This was done and she was again reinterred beneath the altar, and I will be showing you that spot in the last part of our tour. The next victim to die here was King Henry VIII's own auntie, Margaret Pole, the Viscountess of Salisbury. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. All she had done is have a son called Reginald Pole. He was a cardinal going around Europe drumming up support for the Pilgrimage of Grace. Now, as the king couldn't punish the son, he punished the mother instead. But that proud old lady, she refused to place her neck on the block. She said, "That's for traitors, and I'm not a traitor." She then jumped off the scaffold and ran down towards the bloody tower, with an axeman behind her chasing after her with his axe, taking great lumps off her as she went. Truly horrific end to a 67-year-old proud lady. Again, laid to rest in there. Within a year, the axe was to fall again twice on the same day. This time on the young neck of Catherine Howard, and her lady-in-waiting, Jane Rochford. Now, poor old Catherine Howard didn't want to make the same mistake as Queen Anne Boleyn, so she tried really hard to have a son. Really, really, really hard. Not necessarily with the king, but she was definitely trying hard. She was accused of having a number of affairs, but it was the one with Thomas Culpeper that would be her undoing. She was reported to have said from a scaffold site, "Today I stand before you, the Queen of England, but I would much rather be the wife and lover of the only man I truly loved and who truly loved me, Master Thomas Culpeper." She probably shouldn't have said that. Thomas Culpeper certainly thought so. He was at the back like this. Jane Boleyn, who was Viscountess of Rochford, she died within an hour of her queen. Her only crime really was that she hadn't told the king of her mistress's liaison. Now the next queen to die here was Lady Jane Grey, but I'm going to tell you that story inside the chapel, which is just done better in there. So gents, if you're wearing a hat or cap like me, please take it off as you enter the church as a sign of respect if your religion permits you to do so. Also, now's the time to turn off your electronic equipment like your phones and your cameras, because you're not allowed to take pictures in there, and if your phone goes off inside the chapel, God will smite you dead. Not necessarily today, but he's definitely going to catch up with you sometime in the future, and then you'll be sorry. And finally, ladies, before you go, be careful. There is a small step there on the way into the chapel. It is haunted, and it trips up wicked and sinful women. All right, now don't you worry, you wicked and sinful women, because I'll be waiting just inside the door with my arms ready outstretched like a coil spring, just in case you should fall. Now, if you do, I will catch you and hold you closely to my bosom for what you're going to consider an inappropriate length of time. So I'm going to be very busy, gents. If you trip and fall, it's really going to hurt. And now if you'd like to grab my esteemed colleague up there, we're going to let you in and I'll see you on the other side.